I will get us kicked off. You ready to go, Glenn?
Yeah, always.
Super. So I want this session to be super informal because ultimately it is a behind the scenes look chat. And I think it should be up to people to ask questions and, basically pick at all of the interesting things that we're going to talk about in the first few minutes. We'll run through really quickly NZ Post, how they've got Flow, what they're using it for, and then Glenn will actually spend some time talking about all. He'll do a demo of Flow, but also talk about all of the stuff they do now, and also they've got quite an interesting roadmap and different things, different technology stacks happening. Yeah, feel free to pick away, and I'll just note that this session is being recorded, so we will clean it up a little bit. And if you don't want us to use segments where you are, it should be okay. We'll be okay. Just let me know.
Right.
All right.
So,
So I'll start by introducing you. Actually, why don't you introduce yourself?
sure.
Even better.
Yep. So Glenn Dodd, that's me. I'm technically the customer integration manager, or at least that's the last title that I remember. It has changed once or twice after that. They're titles that are just more gobbledygook to do with agile type methodology, but they don't actually make any real sense to external people. So I just keep saying customer integration manager. Basically, whenever a customer of NZ Post wants to be able to send parcels or use our tracking systems or book jobs or find prices from us, they want to know how can we do it in an electronic method instead of an old method where you write the delivery address onto the parcel, onto the box, and you put a prepaid ticket on it where you don't remember the tracking number and then you can't track anything. So Michael works with me, and we basically talk to customers about here's the APIs and here's the tools that you can use with us. And aside from the tools that are related to labeling, we also have a need to get parcel information from customers. We have a bunch of APIs for that sort of stuff. But there are always problems with customers sending us data, whether their PCs die and their hard drive is lost, or the internet goes down for an hour or two, or my side has a problem. There's always some sort of issue in the real world because nothing is perfect and runs 100% 24/7. So,
So NZ Post is quite a big business, isn't it? I mean, in New Zealand, you'd
yeah,
count it as one of the biggest businesses.
yeah. There's 10 or 12,000 employees, something like that. Um, we do, I think we're 40 something percent of the delivery market. We certainly cover more of New Zealand than any other courier company in New Zealand. And I tend to focus more on the domestic stuff being delivered into New Zealand, but actually half of our business is sending stuff overseas as well. So I don't tend to comment on that much because there's a whole different team for that. The APIs that Michael and I look after, they support both domestic and international. But when we're talking to customers, and Michael and I talk to customers every day about how to work with us and if they're having any issues, how to help with any particular problems, it tends to be stuff coming into New Zealand or just being delivered around New Zealand. So most of what I talk about is what we call domestic. And now I've been with Post for just finishing 19 years, just about to start the 20th. Michael's been here for almost as long. We've been doing the same roles for a long time. The technology that sits behind the jobs that we do has altered as time's gone along, but the basic conversations, the basic thrust of what we're talking to customers about is pretty much the same. So Michael and I have had lots and lots of experience of talking to customers who are normally senders for us, people who send parcels. We occasionally talk to someone who receives a parcel, but most of the time it's the senders that we're interested in and that we deal with.
And things have shifted a lot post COVID, or because of COVID, should I say?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Michael and I can both work from home and do everything that we need from home. And when I start sharing my screen, you'll see that I'm remoting into a PC that's sitting on my desk in the office, so that I can still get to all the corporate type things that we need. Being NZ Post, our security requirements are pretty tough because, part owned by the government. So there's all sorts of redundancy and stuff that really gets in the way for people like Michael and myself, but we've found ways around it to make stuff work for us. And we found ways to make the COVID working from home good for us. In fact, we actually don't want to go back to the office. It's really good not having to drive into the office and sit in peak hour traffic in Auckland. But we do still have occasions, Michael more than I, where we actually drive out to customers to physically help them if we can't do it remotely. But
And in terms
luckily,
of, yeah, I was actually thinking in terms of transaction volumes, because I know COVID made a big difference to those
yep,
types of things.
yep, that was the other part which was really good about working from home. We could deal with the increase in parcels moving through the network and look at things far more easily. So when something goes wrong for us, Murphy's Law says it will be that when we're driving to work or driving home from work. So not having to do that driving stuff means that we've got virtually instant access to the systems as and when we need them. But the workload for us, the number of parcels being sent since COVID is technically just skyrocketed. 3 odd years ago, we were hitting our peak Christmas times, and now for the volumes at Christmas, they were the biggest we'd ever had. Now we're finding some of the special months before Christmas and even some of the bigger holidays like Easter and the likes, we're almost hitting those Christmas volumes for those periods. And then of course Christmas is even bigger and bigger. We're lucky in that Post has a big pot of money that they can use to add new depots around the country and add a lot of sorting machines around these new depots. We're spending several $100 million over the next 5 to 10 years in putting new depots and sorting equipment in, which all relies on good information coming from customers. So the APIs that we support with our senders really are the key to getting that information into our systems so that we can let the machines do the work and the people. Well, it's not that we don't need as many people, it's just that they are going to make less mistakes. So if the data comes in good, the machine can do the job it's supposed to do. The person at the end of the queue doesn't have to think about which cage do I put this in. The machine's already put it in the right cage, and then we just move stuff to the courier who does the deliveries. So the couriers do a lot of hard work. They're frequently starting at 4 a.m. in the morning, and often we see scanning still happening at 7, 8 o'clock at night. So there are some very busy people out there. And yeah, the volumes have just increased. Everybody's just gone towards online shopping, and us being one of the biggest senders, the courier companies in New Zealand, we've got the lion's share of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I might just actually check in with a couple of other people who I think might be at, the actual people doing the parcel delivery. So Craig, I don't know, Simon, how much you guys actually use Post versus your own delivery systems, but looking at you, JD Sport as well. Have you guys also noticed significant changes in volume because of COVID?
Definitely. Obviously, COVID was a really busy time for us, and volumes went through the roof. But we found even since COVID, we're still seeing year-on-year growth, which is amazing. So I think that trend of preferring online shopping is just going to be the new go-forward way. It's only going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, and it gets extra hard for the IT departments and all these companies because we never get additional resource. The additional resource goes into the people who actually deliver stuff, people who actually pack the parcels in the warehouses, the practical part that needs to be done. And then, of course, IT is expected just to keep all the systems up and running all the time. And it just gets a little bit harder for the rest of IT. I talk to lots of customers all around the world, and everybody is just under the same stresses. The working from home has actually been the godsend for a lot of the people I talk to.
Yeah, we talked to Flyway, who's a big transport carrier here in New Zealand, actually now part of Post as well. But they mentioned that they doubled depot capacity, and a lot of it was just they could do it because they had the systems and integrations in place already. Yep. So they needed minimal staff and didn't need a lot of people on site to the same degree. So that was certainly something. Sorry, so I didn't want to throw us all down a tangent. Do you want to
That's okay.
talk a little bit about Flow? I know you guys have been using Flow for a long time.
Yeah, so I've been with Post since 2004. So like I say, 19 years, just about to kick into the 20th. And we were previously using BizTalk as the sole integration tool between our own systems and some external systems, some special customers. We were at one point half owned by DHL and NZ Post. And we did a project with them to make sending data between the two sets of customers, so DHL being a sender, us being the carrier who does all the deliveries. So getting order information into us, getting the labels, manifesting information, and then sending the tracking data back. So BizTalk was a really good tool for that sort of thing. And then once we got that up and running, we said, that worked really well. How do I get lots of other customers like DHL, lots of other senders to interact with us in the same sort of way? And the biggest problem we faced at that point was BizTalk was so damned expensive. To get anything done in BizTalk for even a simple mapping of a file in to one of our web services, then it was a minimum of 5K and was frequently being quoted at 15 to 20K if there was any perceived complexity in mapping the file. And that was just something that we couldn't do with our top 100 customers. We would have just spent millions of dollars integrating data, and that just couldn't be done. One, for money, two, for time. BizTalk developers are extremely expensive and extremely hard to locate. And that's when we encountered Flow software. We actually encountered Flow software through one of our customers at the time. Don't remember who it was because that was a long, long time ago, but it's about 15 odd years we've been using Flow. And we looked at what Flow could do. We looked at the price that we had to pay for Flow. And then more importantly, we looked at the fact that somebody like myself, and at that point I was a business analyst for the online department in Post, and it was simple enough for me to use and do the mapping. I didn't need a BizTalk developer, and certainly not a senior BizTalk developer, because that's what we hired back in those days. And I could do it myself, and I could get something done in an hour or 2 hours, where I had to wait 4 or 5 months, 6 months to get access to a developer to do a simple mapping of files coming in or data going out. So we jumped on board with Flow at that point once we saw it, bought the license. Michael and I both went on the simple 101 training course, and the tool is just so simple to use that we really didn't need any additional training. Michael and I picked it up really easily, where I describe myself as not a technical IT guy. I'm probably in most technical meetings I'm having with customers the least IT-ish, but I understand how IT works. I spend a lot of time talking to people about practical stuff, sales type stuff. And if I need somebody who's going to talk about that networky, really in-depth IP addresses and firewalls and GPOs and all sorts of weird stuff, I add Michael to the meeting. But I found Flow software to be simple enough to use for anybody who was like me, just a simple BA, business analyst, and I could get stuff done really quickly. So we started using Flow software to bring in customers' data for the people who couldn't use the web services that we exposed at the time. So there are lots of customers around the world who say, we don't do web services, we do text files and we send files to FTP. And New Zealand, you're just that little wee dot on the end of the world. This is how we do it, so that's how you have to deal with us. They weren't prepared to integrate to the APIs that we had. So Flow software came along and made that job for me really simple, really cost effective. And we were able to onboard customers far more quickly than we used to in the past, particularly the big global customers who just said, no, we're not doing it your way. Here is our global way, and you have to fit in with us. So I'm sure.
Show us.
I'm sure most of the people on the
part
call.
Of the...
Yeah, sure can. Now, the other thing that we'll mention just before I jump into the demo is once we saw the power of Flow software, we actually contracted with Flow to build a pretty little screen on top of it, and we called it Connect It, which was a labeling tool. And the idea of the Connect It tool was that it was not web-based. So previously we'd always been dealing with web-based labeling applications that we'd built ourselves or contracted out to other companies to build. And that's really good as long as the internet is up and stable. And of course, 15 odd years ago, big chunks of New Zealand did not have good internet, or the bigger customers who had to package a couple of thousand parcels a day, the internet was just too slow, where it took 3 or 4 seconds to generate a label. They needed the label generated in half a second, 1 second maximum. When you've got a big warehouse and you're pumping out thousands of parcels, you need the labeling process, which is one of the last steps, to be quick. So we looked at building this tool on top of Flow software. This pretty little screen is how I describe it, and it gets installed inside the customer's network, so in their warehouse, and they have access to label printing really, really quickly. It expanded out into something slightly more than that, but it gave us a piece of software that was installed in the customer's network, so internet was not a problem, and they could print labels 24/7. They didn't need to connect to us to make labeling working. And it gave those customers the surety of, I can keep my warehouse running. Whereas if the internet goes down, or a post API, an NZ Post API that they were consuming goes down, then literally their warehouse is stopped. So we worked with Flow, built this Connect It tool, and put that out. We had about 400 customers on it at one point. And it's just recently been rebranded, and it's now been called SureSend. And it will have some additional features on, particularly when the Statelake component fits in behind it instead of the classic Flow software, because the Statelake will offer more benefits. But the SureSend, the Connect It, is technically just a pretty little screen. And we've had lots and lots of customers, particularly in the bigger warehouses, say that this screen is the fastest one to operate. So it's been well received by the bigger customers. Anyway, I shall go back to sharing my screen.
I will say this though, Glenn and Michael always say pretty screen. I think they mean it's fast and usable.
Yeah, it's a bit grey, but technically, all that people want is a screen where they can plug in an order number. The data's already been fed in behind the order for what the delivery address is, and maybe the service code is an overnight parcel, is its signature required, all those things that are needed to create a label. And then they can just go and hit the print button and out it comes on the printer.
Yeah.
And that can happen really quickly. We in fact had a customer who insisted that at the point that they entered an order number, they had to have the label coming out of the printer in less than 2 seconds. Now, with most online tools, you're looking at 6, 7, 8 seconds. So it made a huge difference.
I put a screenshot in the chat.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yes, while I say it's pretty, it's not, but it's super functional.
It's our baby and we love it.
Yeah.
No matter
So,
how it looks.
we actually just built that. We built that tool based on the power of Flow software. So Flow is the engine that sits underneath it. Connect It / SureSend is just the pretty screen sitting on top of it, giving people buttons to push. But the power was actually Flow, so it enabled those customers to be able to bring in order information in whatever format they wanted, and it would populate it into a SQL table, and then the Connect It screen was accessing the SQL tables and generating the labels, sending the information to the NZ Post APIs in the background, but all that stuff was sort of hidden from the warehouse user who just needed a screen to print labels. But anyway, Flow software. So Michael and I have been using this for a long time. I'm going to run through one of the things that I do almost every day, and it generates a lot of revenue for NZ Post. So first off, we are interested in parcels. We want labels on parcels so that we can deliver the parcel to the right person, the right address. We need supporting information about that label, which we call a manifest. Manifest is an unusual word because it means many different things in many different scenarios, but to us, it was the supporting information for a label that enabled us to bill for that label when it moved through our network. At some point, we decided that this information is really useful, and we started putting sorting machines around the country. So initially in Auckland, and we've had one down in Christchurch for a few years now. and we leverage that same manifest information to feed the sorting machines so that a parcel could go over the sorter. It would scan the barcode on the label, look up the tracking number, find the delivery address from that manifested information, and sort it to the appropriate place. So we were able to get operational benefits as well as just the original intent, which was, here's a parcel, what do I bill it for? So a customer would tell us it was an overnight parcel. Here's my account number, it's an overnight parcel, we want signature required and it's 10 kilos, and we would bill them for that. Now, we have forever had APIs of one sort or another for customers to send that information to, but there's always some customer who says, I can't use those APIs. So we've got a couple of items in the screen, which I'll open very shortly, where I take in what we call non-standard customers, the ones who have to give us a text file of some sort. And I take that data and I map it into the format that I need for my web services. And then I send it directly to the web service, almost as if the customer had done it. So because that was simple enough for me, usually like an hour's worth of effort, no big deal. Versus what the customer would have had to have spent and prioritized in their IT list of things to do. So an IT team might tell you it'll take 3 weeks. Oh, and by the way, it's going to be 6 months before I can even start. Flow software enabled me to be able to take that whole time frame out, do the work on behalf of the customer, have confidence in the data I was sending to the web service, which then triggered the billing and triggered feeding the machines. So that's some very simple stuff that we have in here. So anyone who has used Flow will recognize any of these types of maps. So let me just pick something that's fairly simple. So in the mappings in here, most of the time, I'm simply mapping a value from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, or I'm putting in a value myself. So because I'm trying to keep track of particular fields like this, so date now, dispatch date, just put in the value as now. I'm sure everyone on this call has done that sort of thing. Account number, either it's been given to us by this particular customer, or in this case, they don't tell us our account number. We call it a trading partner ID. So I was putting that value in for this set of data. So nothing complicated about that, right? So that's why someone as simple as what I used to be, just a BA, could use Flow really quickly and easily. So I've set that up for a bunch of customers. There aren't that many of them left. You can see my list here is actually relatively small. Office Max are still sending us some files via FTP for manifests and something we call pre-advices. But most of the customers that I had in this list, it was a lot longer, 10 years ago, have all migrated to using the web services directly as and when they wanted and needed extra information from us. Different API functionality, but I still have customers who still insist on sending us text files. Now, the thing that I really want to show you, and this is the part that really generates the money for us, and sorry, I can't make this screen any bigger, is what we call manual manifesting. Now, every customer prints a label, we pick up the box, we deliver it. We want supporting information called a manifest. Lots and lots of times we do not receive a manifest from the customer. Without that manifest, I can't bill them. So I have a process called manual manifesting, which takes any information that we have about that parcel through our network. So basically, as it's been picked up, gone through the network, been delivered out the other side, at that point, we're going and looking and saying, do I have the manifest so I can bill it? No. Let's go and find all the information I possibly can through our network. And it is served up to me via a report, because we have a reporting team who can access every system inside NZ Post. So instead of me trying to create connections from Flow software through all the MyRitter firewalls and everything else that I'd need to work my way through an NZ Post's environment, which would be really, really difficult, the reporting team gather all the data I'm interested in and send me a file every night. I take that file and I ingest it. I bring this detail file in, it's a tab delimited file, and I load the data into a table. So I have my little SQL tables here. and I have this little table here called missing manifest import, and I'll just pop that open just for a second. So you can see that I have lots and lots of fields here, and not every single one of them will be populated, but many of them will. So I might want to know, where did we pick up the item from? So I get a depot and a suburb. So when a scan happens on the pickup, we know where it was. So that will help me establish where is the origin point of this parcel, and I get delivery information. Where did it get delivered to? So we can figure out it went from A and delivered to B, so that I can use that in the mapping for the billing process. Sometimes I don't get a delivery scan, but I might get what we call an out for delivery, which is the step before the delivery. Or maybe we handed it over to some other part of the network. We handed it over to a post shop, because that's where the customer said, can you just deliver it there and I'll pick it up when I'm next going past. So I get all the information I possibly can about this item, including this little section down here, which is called QB-scan. So our sorting machines, they have QB scanners in them. So they basically have little laser beams that look at the 4 sides in the top to measure the size of the box. So we have length, width, height in here. And we also have weight. So we're capturing the weight of the item. Those are the types of things I really expect the customer to tell me in a manifest. So they tell me it was 10 kilos and the box was 10 centimeters by 20 by 30. If I don't get any data, I need to do my best to find that data. So if it went over our sorting machines, I've got access to all of that stuff. If it went over the sorting machine, we've also got information about where we sent it to, which is better than where was the suburb that we did the delivery scan in. So it'll actually tell me, which street that the item was actually delivered to. So we've got access to lots of information. Some stuff does not go over our sorters. So in that case, I've got the report figuring out for this customer, for this service code, what is their average weight. So that when I have to make something up, I'm using something that relates to that customer. And I've got a couple of different codes here. An overnight parcel, an economy parcel, those sorts of things. So based on the tracking number, I do know a little bit of information about the parcel, but not very much. So the team sends me all of this. I load it into the table. Now, the data that I get sent in this report is huge. There's usually 30, 40,000 items a day in that report. A big chunk of the data that's in that report is rubbish. Our sorter will scan things like if you put a parcel of Weet-Bix across the sorter, it'll scan the barcode on the side of the Weet-Bix, and that's not something I want to know about, but the sorter captured it and it gets fed into the report. So I then have a second step, a second process where I have some code in here and I filter out the rubbish. We also get things where particular customers build through a different mechanism, not this mechanism. So instead of sending us a manifest, there's some agreement with Post that they get manually billed, say, $20,000 a month. Just whatever the reason is, I don't need to care. What I do need to know is that for this customer, I don't want to create a manifest because I will end up double billing them. So I've been able to use the simple mapping and flow based on the data that's been fed to me by the reporting system to say, I don't want to bill these ones, let's just ignore them. Now, there's obviously a fair few customers in here that I need to ignore. And then I log a reason inside the table as if I don't want to manifest them. Why did I not want to manifest them? So I log a reason and I give it a code. So number 1, then I go down to number 2, 3, that sort of thing. And I've also got some customers that fit into a category of, I'll just scroll down a little bit. I want to give them 10 days. So after we first scan this item, normally I would build them, manual manifest them the day after, but these customers are special and I get on well with them for an IT point of view. And I know that if I give them a list of tracking numbers that we haven't seen a manifest for, they will do something proactive to send us the manifests. So I was able to build into this process, if you're one of their special customers, let's give them 10 days. to sort stuff out and send me the details. If they send me the real details, I don't need my process to do anything. They get billed exactly what they expect to get billed, and I don't have to make anything up or use my best judgment. So I'm using simple mapping. There's nothing complicated in here. Really, really simple stuff to go through and sort out the data. I've got another bunch of customers who I'd have to give slightly more than 10 days. I give them 21. But that's really simple. And so I do all this in separate steps. So I like to separate things into different steps, mainly for like a tips and tricks type thing. I want to be able to, if there's a problem, diagnose it. And if I do everything all in memory in one big set of mapping, then I find it harder to sort stuff out and find where something went wrong. So I like to break it down into smaller steps, and that sort of goes with the rest of my normal work day at NZ Post. Michael and I are problem solvers. That's what we do all day. We talk to customers, they've got a problem, we figure it out, we help them resolve it. Lots of problems seem quite large, but once you break those problems down into smaller steps, they become manageable. So I use that methodology in pretty much everything I do at Post. I tend to get thrown problems where people go, this is really big and this is really hard. And I go, yeah, so once you break it down, once you start mapping it out, then the problems are much, much simpler. And I can resolve, if there's 5 steps to it, so I can resolve steps 1 and 2 today. And we need to do some extra work on step 3, and that might take a week. But instead of people just looking at it and go, oh, that'll take 2 months to get sorted out. Well, no, I can actually sort out a whole lot of stuff at the start. I might get 80% of the issue resolved, today or tomorrow, just by breaking it down into steps. So I just personally like to treat anything I'm doing inside Flow software as the same sort of methodology, break it down into steps, import it, process it, which is me just sorting out what's the stuff I do want to process today and the stuff that I don't want to process. Then I have a third step, which is where I take the stuff I do want to create a manifest for. So on the left-hand side, I've got my data that has come in, and this is filtered for just the ones that I've decided are good, that I want to use. And on the right-hand side, I've mapped them into, instead of going directly to my web service for manifesting, I'm mapping them into a separate table, again, so that I can keep track of what do I think I'm going to send to the web service, because debugging something is always hard, and trying to debug a production issue in UAT is often even harder because UAT is never set up the same as production. So I tend to separate stuff here. So again, I've just got simple mapping. I'm just taking a value and copying it across. Nothing complicated here. You can see I've got a couple of special values here. By default, I'm mapping in a value from the left-hand side. If that value is a particular thing, I actually want to change it to something else. And there are just a few random scenarios for things that I need to do like that. But generally, I'm just sending the data through, applying a little bit of logic. So I might have been told something was 2 kilos, but when I get to the point where I'm mapping it into our web service, the web service is in grams. So I multiply it by 1,000 at that point. So lots of little things here that are just, again, simple. Any type of BA should be able to figure this out. You don't need to be a developer, which is something that I find attractive about Flow as well. Technically, I'm a self-taught developer, but I'd put myself on a scale of 1 to 10. I'd call myself a 0.5. I wouldn't even call myself a 1. I'm not good enough for that. I can sit next to a programmer and I can read their code, particularly if they comment it. That makes life a whole lot simpler. But I don't need to be a developer. I don't need to be that skilled to do stuff inside Flow. Then when I finally get to the end, I've done those first 3 steps. So bring everything in, filter out the crap, decide which stuff I want to process. And then I had a 4, but I replaced it with a 4.1. 4.1 is where I basically send the data to my web service. So I've kind of done all the hard work already, all the heavy lifting. And most of the time here, I'm just mapping a value across. On the odd field, I'll have something where I've put in a hard-coded value for some reason. but most times it's just a straight map it across. Now let's throw it at the web service, and then I can check on the table that I'd mapped the data into. So the original data came into this thing here, missing manifest import, and then the step 3 was putting it into ECL online manifest. ECL online is just the name of our web service, so it keeps it nice and simple for me. And I've got my manual table. So this is where I'm putting all the ones that I've made up versus the ones that I've brought in for non-standard customers, which I just put into this table. And then I have a separate step and an action that takes the data out of here, sends it to the web service. And that can chug along and do as many items as it needs. I find this particular approach, I'm just using the standard flow configuration. I'm not doing anything too technical. I've got a particular customer I have to do a special thing for. So let me just open that up. Give me a second. So on particular days, let's just jump down to now. So on particular days, I want to process this customer. Every other day, I want to ignore it. So instead of having to do stuff in code and keeping track of code releases for keeping these dates up to date, I just threw these dates into a table and just had the code inside Flow. Go and look it up and say, is today one of these special days? It either is or it isn't. If it is one of these special days, then it follows the extra step in the mapping. So I tend to find that simple because adding stuff into a table is easier than adding stuff into code. And then finally, I've got the step 5, which is I remove all of the crap data from the main system here so that tomorrow, when this process repeats itself and I get the fresh day's information, a lot of the crap that I had yesterday will have been marked as not required anymore. And the reporting tool that feeds me the information for step 1 will not show the items that I'd wiped out in step 5 yesterday. And so I'm keeping the data sort of trim and clean. Yeah, I basically just don't consider any of the stuff that I'm doing here to be hard. Any simple BA type person should be able to pick up this tool and use it. So whilst I'm not, I don't class myself as a very technical person, you know, an top IT developer type thing. You don't need to be to use Flow. You know, Michael and I went on the 101 training session. That's all we needed. We get the odd little bit of help from Flow software as and when we strike something that's unusual, but you know, Michael and I can put this sort of stuff together in our sleep because it's really just that simple as a tool and effective. And I haven't had to pay 20,000 for a BizTalk developer and all the complicated change controls. It's all around that sort of stuff.
And you're doing 10,000 transactions per day.
Oh,
is
yeah,
what
easily.
You told me, Michael.
Easily. Yeah, so the original import file might be 30, 40,000. By the time I filtered out the crap and I put stuff into here's the stuff that I want to process, the step 3, yeah, there can easily be 10,000 items a day. And it sounds really silly that I have 10,000 items a day that customers haven't sent us manifests for. But given that we get 500,000 odd a day of parcels, you know, that's not too bad. Yeah, not ideal. You know, some days it's less and some days it's more, but it really just depends on what's happening in the real world. If my API goes down, that receives the manifests in from all the normal customers, then this file that comes in the next day is just going to be huge. Fortunately, that doesn't happen very often, but there's always something happening in the outside world. A customer had an issue, their internet went down, somebody cut the cable in the middle of the road, so a bunch of customers lost their internet for a couple of hours. You know, shit happens in the real world. So this is my backup process, and this generates revenue. Without this manifest, I could not bill these customers, and that would be a huge loss of revenue to NZ Post. And this thing here, you know, Michael and I, over the years, I've tweaked it and rewritten bits because I just wasn't happy with what I'd done, or the rules had changed and I had to add in new requirements. I don't know, Michael and I, over the years, might have spent 30 odd hours maybe, but that would be rewriting it, you know, several times as well. and getting it into where I've got it now, the final structure. But you can see from this sort of thing here, like I say, there's nothing hard about this bit of code. And as I was asking one of the guys at the start, what was the language that's in here? I kept wanting to say it was Delphi. And that was partly because Fujitsu, a company that we use inside NZ Post for one of our core systems, that's all written in Delphi. And I kept wanting to say this was Delphi as well. He corrected me, it's Object Pascal, but it looks very reminiscent to Delphi. Because Delphi uses Object Pascal, is how he was describing it. So that's how I use the Flow software for the amount of money that we spend on a license each year versus the amount of money that this one section here generates, and this section for what we call the non-standard customers, the ones who can't use our web services or won't use our web services. It's we're paying off the license fee in days. It's really simple, well worth it. We are going to go to Statelake. So this being the 32-bit, not having the greatest JSON ability to use JSON in here, most of our APIs now are being built in JSON, not XML. But this version handles XML really well, just as XML's been around for a very long time. Statelake handles JSON really well. So we will be upgrading this to Statelake as soon as Andrew is able to free up the time and effort to help me do the basic steps of the migration. I've done a clean install of Statelake on a separate PC, and that was really, really simple. So simple I didn't actually need much help other than we had to call Flow support for one step. We were just putting in a code in the wrong place. We just went do after that, but it was all good. And looking forward to using Statelake for the extra abilities it's got, the 64 bits, the extra JSON API type stuff. And that will be even better for our Connect It SureSend tool once that uses Statelake as well, because it will have access to the newer APIs that NZ Post is offering out as well. Ooh, what else have we got
Craig will
here?
be excited to have you trial our migration tool as well.
Yeah, well, Michael and I are both looking forward to it. Yeah, it shouldn't be hard. I know, talking for you, that Flyaway is the big hard customer. Technically, from what you can see on my screen here, very basic mapping. The migration tool should just handle me like a breeze.
So we do have a question in the chat from Simon that I might raise, because while we're still talking about this piece. Simon, do you want to read it out?
No, it's just from your machines, you collect quite a substantial amount of cube and weight.
Yep.
So, and you mentioned that customers, when they're creating their own manifest, they supply that information.
The cube weight as well. Yep.
Is it compared?
It is. So if the customer tells us that something is 10 kilos in a particular size box, when it goes over our sorter, so to start off with, we believe the customers. If the item doesn't go over the sorter, we're going to bill what the customer told us. So ultimately, we bill them that. And then when it does go over one of our sorters, we capture that information. If the sorter says that actually the item was 20 kilos, not 10, and the size of the box was much bigger than what you told us the size of the box was, then we send that information through to another little portion of the system called revenue protection, and we figure out, is there a difference in price between what you told us and what it really was? And if there was, then we add on the additional cost. So we've already charged you for the 10 kilos. If it was actually 20 and there was a difference in price, we will charge you for the additional 10 kilos for the additional whatever dollars it was.
So that's part of your standard process, or
that's just an internal. That's just because we have the data on the machines. We utilize it to see where customers make mistakes. They get this extra line on their invoice called revenue protection. They look at it and go, "What's this?" Then they go and find out from a salesperson what it is, and they hopefully go back into their warehouse and figure out why the person said it's a small box when actually it was a large box. And then the customer resolves that little bit of training, and the person doesn't make the mistake. Oh, sounds like Michael's in the background there.
I had a question about how you map data from other tables when you're doing this, but I think you showed us the dates and customers. So I think you answered.
Yeah, all I'm doing, instead of just mapping from file to file or file to web service, I'm just mapping file to table. That would be, I would have thought, quite common for anyone who uses Flow. And I just built the tables myself, put an index on them, put an ID on them, put a date field on it as well. So yeah, I still consider everything that I'm doing really basic, really simple. Flow and Statelake can do a hell of a lot more than what I'm using it for, but it's a godsend to us. If I didn't have this tool, we would be missing millions of dollars of revenue every year that we would not be able to recover, or I'd have to go and invent some other process and probably have to hand it over to some developers who would charge us an arm and a leg, and then every couple of weeks there's always a new scenario where we need to change something, tweak it, have to pay another fortune to get those things done, go through change control, all that sort of stuff, which is incredibly hard to deal with, versus actually this tool is really simple and I can do it myself. And the business trusts me to do, they tell me what they need and I go and put it in, I test it with them, and they're all happy.
And Glenn, you mentioned at one point that with Statelake, you found the JSON easier. I don't know. I think if you are a 0 point and I'm a negative.
So Flow doesn't really have JSON working very well in it. There's ways to make it work, and Michael spent a little bit of time trying to make it work for other little projects. But Statelake has it kind of built in native, and given that NZ Post's APIs, everything new we build is in JSON, we want to interact with it through those APIs. So we really need to be able to communicate in JSON. We can build XML versions of these JSON APIs as well for some customers who need it, but almost every customer we're dealing with now, their tools can use JSON. So they all seem to be happy with that. So we're looking forward to having our connected Sure Send tool updated at some point to use Statelake instead of Flow, so that we just gain that extra capability. And Statelake looks exactly like Flow. Yeah, it was really, really simple to look at.
I did want to ask anyone else if they had questions, particularly people who use the whole shipping thing often, whether there was any burning questions they had. Why is my parcel lost? Which I don't know.
In which case I'd point you at our call center. But yeah, Michael and I look after the technical parts of making sure that the systems that we offer to customers work. We are, both Michael and I, we're kind of like customers of ourselves, particularly that manifesting step and the manual manifesting step, just so that we can help our customers. Like I said at the start, some of our customers just find it too hard to do themselves, or their global policy is, no, we deal with old style things. America, real old style. They still deal with faxes, stuff like that. But FTP, they don't even handle secure FTP. I did have a customer, a global customer I was dealing with a couple of weeks ago, where I needed SFTP, and I was struggling to use the Flow one that's inside the NZ Post environment, because I had to burn holes through firewalls and get approval and all that sort of stuff, which is really hard at Post. So Tasneem was kind enough to give me a what's it called, a release candidate copy of Statelake, so that I could just install that and get the secure FTP thing going. It was like 10 minutes effort and done, and I've got that customer onboarded and working fine. And as soon as I can migrate the Flow internally at NZ Post up to Statelake, and we burn all those firewall rules and everything else that are needed, I can move away from that release candidate and have the proper version doing all the work. But yeah, we were able to get past a problem really quickly.
Cool.
And that's why we use Flow. It is a quick, simple tool to use, particularly with data mapping. I'm sure it does a hell of a lot more, but that's primarily what I use it for.
We've got a couple minutes left on the call. If there's any other questions, either sing out now or pop something into the chat. Otherwise, I will just wrap up. And of course, if you have questions afterwards that you don't want to put in the chat, you just think of, 2 o'clock in the middle of the night. Oh, I should have asked Glenn that. You can always email me and I will forward your questions on. So I will thank you for coming to this community session. It's really nice to see people here and engage. And I will send out a little follow-up survey afterwards. I'm keen to understand the kind of things people like about these sessions, what else we could do to make sure that you're using Flow or you're learning about Flow and Statelake and getting the most out of your investment in that platform.